Hi, this is Len Edgerly. Today is June 14th, 2019. I am bringing you the show from Ocean Park, Maine for the first time this year. We're up at the family cottage, and tonight it's a fireside chat with a real fire. I'm down in the living room of the cottage, and we've got fire with real wood. It's not a gas fireplace, and the aroma and the constantly varying configuration of the fire, and I'm an inveterate poker of fire, so I like to just get it flickering just right, which it is right now. Darlene and Claire upstairs asleep, and I'll be putting the show together, hopefully not too late into the night. We celebrated my daughter's 40th birthday up here with a dinner of Thai food takeout with the boys, and it's a little taste of summer before we actually move up here for July and August. My interview this week is with Neal Thompson, who is managing the Amazon Literary Partnership. He's the manager of that program, and it's a chance for Amazon, quietly at first and now a little bit more publicly, to give back to the literary world, and it's something which they're doing with, I think, quite a bit of skill and insight into exactly what kinds of programs writers need to get started in the process that might end up with their books being bestsellers on Amazon.
I feel strongly that everyone has a story and everyone deserves to have the opportunity to tell their story.
I've got a couple of news stories I'd like to talk to you about before we get to the interview. The first is a worldwide survey which Kindle and Amazon commissioned. It was conducted by a company named Kelton Global in 13 different countries. They surveyed 27,305 readers, all of them 18 and above. And this was an attempt to, I think it started out with an idea that reading is good, and let's get some survey data that shows the advantages of reading, particularly the kind of reading that you do in a Kindle, a sort of undistracted reading, which more and more is getting to be something kind of precious, and with all of the screens that are distracting us all the time. So take this survey with a bit of grain of salt, because it is sort of a purpose-built survey, but I'm sure that the statistical work was legitimate and some kind of intriguing information came out of it. One of them was that they asked people in all these different countries how much they read, and people who read weekly, at least once a week they're reading a book, 71% of those people describe themselves as happy, and the others who read less than that, only 55% consider themselves happy. Whether this would be proof that reading makes you happy, I don't know, but it makes some kind of intuitive sense to me. I think I'm happier in any week that I do some reading, especially if it's fiction and kind of reading which takes me via a story into something that's kind of a new world. The other, this one I found interesting. 45% of the people that they surveyed said they are making it a personal development goal to read more this year. Almost half of the people they talked to, all of them sensing that if they read more books in a year, then they're maybe going to have a better year. So that makes sense to me as well. They had a breakdown by countries, and in Brazil, India, Italy, Japan, and Mexico, they found that people prefer to read more than getting extra sleep. Now, it's, I think, notable that the countries that wasn't the case for included U.S., Canada, UK, Spain, France, Italy, Australia, and China. So, but in those 5 countries, Brazil, India, Italy, Japan, and Mexico, reading maybe, I don't know, has a little more value than sleep. That's saying something. And there was a similar set of countries, Brazil, China, India, and Mexico, where people wanted to read more than wanted to lose weight. So, kind of an intriguing bit there. There was a second area of information that came out of the survey. More than 80% of the people that they surveyed credit reading for improving their relationships. And I'm not sure if how they phrased this, but the way they reported it at the Day One blog post at Amazon was more than 65% of people agree that reading is a major turn-on. So if you're meeting people and you find out that they're readers, that is maybe something which makes a person seem more romantic. 1/3 of readers turn to books to solve problems in a relationship. So the relationship advantages of reading as well as the happiness advantages were pointed out in this survey. And in the report, they had the data, and then they said, and by the way, we just happen to have the dedicated e-readers, the Kindles, the 3 types of Kindles, and that's fair. They paid for the survey. They got information, which certainly does confirm common sense for those of us who love to read books, like I know everybody who listens to this show does. The second story I want to talk to you about is titled, What Exactly is the Point of Amazon's Treasure Truck? And this is an engaging piece written by Caitlin Tiffany at Vox on May 28th. She did some reporting on the phenomenon of the treasure trucks, and I've talked about my visits to the treasure trucks in Denver and Boston in the past. She updated the information by saying that there are now 35 of these trucks operating in 25 major cities, and the program launched, I guess you'd say quietly, in the summer of 2015 with one truck in Seattle. She has a entertaining list of all of the bizarre products which these trucks feature. I mean, each day that there's an offer, if you sign up for it, you get a text message saying the treasure truck now has this deal, and it's usually at least 30% off, and it's just one item. And if you happen to want that item, you might drive to wherever the closest truck is. You buy it first, and they have a limited number of them, so there's a little bit of a generated buying frenzy. If you are interested in this thing, you have to click buy before they run out, and if you succeed in getting one, then they say, okay, now you can go pick it up at this truck that's parked somewhere during this particular window. So it was it's a feature story in Vox, but it was probing in an intelligent way. I thought, why is Amazon doing this? What in the whole realm of its retail strategy, from physical stores, the 4-star stores, the bookstores, the pop-up stores, which has kind of come and gone at places like Whole Foods. What are they doing driving these trucks around? They're very colorful, and they have music and bubble machines, and when you go to pick up your thing, it's sort of like a little carnival. And she couldn't get any comment directly from Amazon. They didn't return her questions, she says in the article. In Googling what she could find about the treasure truck, she found an article in Digiday that said Amazon is morphing into a major contender in the advertising business, and so it needs to cultivate relationships with outside brands. So the treasure truck may be more a way to make relationships with the vendors who make these products available. If they've got some extra stuff and they want to move a bunch of items, Amazon says, well, let's put them on the treasure trucks, and then they get to see the way that Amazon is creatively advertising these items and moving them quickly through the day. And a lot of it gets on social media. If you go and you have fun doing this, you might put it up on your Instagram feed, and so that's an interesting theory, that this might look like retailing, but maybe its real purpose is to continue Amazon's growth in the advertising business. The writer found an Amazon truck in Brooklyn. I think she was based in New York City, and pretty clearly was talking to employees on the truck, asking questions. I'm sure without saying she was a reporter. A little bit questionable practice there. That's something I try not to do if I'm going to be really quoting people. But she said the employees on that particular truck said everything must have 4 stars or higher in order to be on the truck. That rang a bell with me because, of course, you've got the 4-star stores. So I don't know, is there any kind of a parallel testing of products here, testing just the products that are rated 4 stars and above at Amazon.com? But anyway, that's unconfirmed and was the basis of what one employee told this reporter. When she went to a different truck at a different location and said that she was a reporter, the employees wisely said, well, you're going to have to call the public relations department or media affairs to get information. We're not supposed to be, being official spokesman for the company. Coincidentally, I heard from listener Mark Roberts in the Dallas area who enclosed a photo of a treasure truck that he had visited, and it turned out that an offer came to him on his phone for a Go Sports Battle Chip Backyard Golf Cornhole game, $27.99. That was 30% off. And it looks like it's a golf chipping game. It comes with colorful golf balls, and you kind of chip them into 3 pockets on a slanted thing. And looks like fun. It comes in an attractive case. Well, Mark jumped at this, and then he wrote me an account of it, which gives some insight into at least one person's experience of this, and it matches my own. He wrote, "It was ridiculous, pure marketing. I get this text from Amazon like, rush down here right now because it is Black Friday and we're practically paying people to buy things. So, of course, I bought it. Then I jump in the Jeep, and Carson is his Scotty, go screaming down there, and they are blaring music and have a bubble machine going, and it's like a carnival sideshow, and we had a great time with those guys." Well, the guys manning the truck, he said in another email, loved Carson and took some photos of Mark and Carson at this thing, and were clearly having fun distributing these golf products, and Mark had fun doing it. And fun, I think, is the operative word in my experience of it. I've bought beef sliders in Denver and steaks. There was a Rocketbook product that I was first introduced to at the treasure truck. I drove 20 minutes one night to Brookline to get that on a truck. And even when I don't sign up to buy the item that's presented to me on the app, I have to check it out. I have to see what it is. I click on it to see, and then if I'm vaguely interested in it, I'll see which locations it's at. In Denver, sometimes it's at the Whole Foods that's nearby. In Boston, they seem to be a little further away from us in Cambridge, so it's usually more of a drive. And up here at the beach, there aren't any in Portland, Maine yet, so I don't have to be tempted to be driving to a treasure truck when I'm up here for the summer. And when you get to the truck, it's bright, it's got colors, it's got music, and because you've already bought the thing, you're just going there to get your item, and you kind of feel like you've won a prize to the extent that you buy the hype that the products might not be available if you don't click now. And I think that's true, because a lot of times when I've seen something that I would have been interested in, it says sold out, sorry, there aren't any more available. So when you get to the truck, you feel like it's kind of the end of a treasure hunt, and you succeeded in clicking in time, and you succeeded in finding the truck, and your reward is that you get to pick it up, and there's some fun people who are running bubble machines and music and making it pleasant. My assumption is that Amazon is somebody probably came up with this as an idea and some kind of brainstorming session. One of these 2 pizza groups said, well, what if we had treasure trucks? What if we just sort of came up with a deal every day and just sort of had people sign up, and probably had a 6-page memo explaining the idea, and got it launched. And if it started in 2012, 2015. So it's been going now for coming on 4 years. There must have been enough success to roll out not just one truck in Seattle, but 35 trucks across the country. And learning what kinds of environments create buzz and create interest among buyers. That's information that could be useful in a store itself, or it could be useful online. And I think what I've grown to understand and realize about Amazon's retail strategy is that it's constantly testing and learning about how to delight customers. That's part of the jargon, and I think it's real. And so this treasure truck idea is just kind of a way out there idea. And based on Mark's account and my own experience, there is some delight that happens in these silly things. And they're probably got the machine learning working on it and the AI and everything, that the information about this particular way to sell things is likely to be available in who knows what kinds of projects in the future. So perhaps still a mystery. Treasure trucks, I suspect, might still be a mystery to Amazon itself, but in the meantime, the treasure truck team is having some fun and spreading it around. Time now for the interview. Neal Thompson began his career with 14 years as a newspaper reporter, the last 5 of those at the Baltimore Sun. Then came 10 years as an author, teacher, and freelance writer. He has published 5 books, including A Curious Man, the story of Robert, believe it or not, Ripley. His most recent book is Kickflip Boys, a memoir of freedom, rebellion, and the chaos of fatherhood, that was published in May of last year by Echo. Neal joined Amazon in 2011 as senior editor of Amazon Books, where he managed the Best Books of the Month program and redesigned the Amazon Book Review, previously known by the cumbersome title of Omnivoracious. Since January of 2015, he has been manager of the Amazon Literary Partnership, started 10 years ago. I reached him in Seattle by Skype last week when I was in Las Vegas for the REMARS conference, and I began by asking about the founding of the Literary Partnership.
So we started back in 2009. And I think the idea at the time was, let's just give back to the literary community. It was at a time when Amazon was continuing to do more and more in the books and publishing and self-publishing space. You know, it was just a couple of years after Kindle was introduced. We were heading in the direction of developing Amazon Publishing and Kindle Direct Publishing, and we just felt like, okay, we're deeper in this space. Let's be a good partner to the literary community. Find a bunch of good organizations that are helping writers in different ways, and see if we can provide some support. And I think, it's interesting, over the years, it's evolved quite a bit. It was pretty quiet early on. I think partly because we just wanted to do this work and let it speak for itself and not pat ourselves on the back and not seek for any, not look for anything in return. We didn't ask the organizations to do anything for this funding that we were providing for them. It was just, here's some support. Do good work with it. Let us know how it goes at some point. And then over time, we've kind of expanded that and become a little bit more public and transparent and open about it. And there's some reasons for that we can talk about.
Well, in terms of giving back to the literary community, it seems like you're focusing in now on underrepresented authors. Your target seems a little sharper. Is that just as a result of seeing what worked or seeing what you were drawn to over the decade?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and you're right. It's definitely a product of seeing what worked over time. Just sort of learning as we go. It's an annual cycle. We can only support, a certain number of organizations per year. Over the years, it's been anywhere from 40 to 90. And each year we learn something a little bit more about the kinds of work that these organizations are doing, the kind of work that we want to primarily support. And so you're absolutely right. Like, over time, we've really refined this focus on supporting organizations that intentionally support diverse, upcoming, marginalized, overlooked writers. And they're doing incredible work. And I think part of the reason we decided to focus on that was we realized there's just not a lot of funding out there for that kind of organization, which means if no one's funding it, how do those voices get heard? It's a pretty crowded space out there in the world, in publishing, on the internet, you name it. So anything we felt like we could do to help the right groups, help upcoming writers, particularly writers who might have a harder time getting heard or getting published, it just felt like the right thing to do.
Well, we're going to talk about the two major initiatives with the Poetry Fund and the Literary Magazine Fund, but what are some of the other grants, maybe to smaller groups or more unusual groups, maybe first-time beneficiaries that would kind of give listeners a feel for what you're looking for and what you're supporting?
Yeah, totally. And I'll refer to my notes a little bit here. There are a lot of groups that we've supported kind of year over year that are sort of longstanding partners with us, so to speak, and a couple of those have been doing for a long time the kind of work that we want to support, like Words Without Borders. Awesome organization that does so much with so little to bring stories from around the world, translate them, bring them online. They do a lot to educate writers. They have an online course that has this very specific focus on international literature and global voices.
That one there, of course, Amazon Crossing has done really tremendous work translating books into English from overseas. When you're helping a group like Words Without Borders, do you get a chance sometimes to put them in touch with some of the people at Amazon Crossing for somebody that really looks like they have potential?
Absolutely. Yeah. Gabby, Page 4, she and I stay in touch regularly on this kind of thing. There are a handful of organizations that I support that we sort of like tag team on things. One example is this year we supported the Penn World Voices Festival. And I was able to connect Amazon Crossing with the folks at Penn World Voices. They knew each other already, but it was a way to sort of emphasize the work that Crossing is doing in that same space. So Crossing brought a couple of their authors to Penn World Voices. Similarly, we've supported the Best Translated Book Awards over the years. Comes out of Rochester Open Books program up there, run by Chad Post. Crossing knows those guys as well, so we've had sort of these collaborations over time.
Good. So, what are some other examples?
Yeah, some other examples. Asian American Writers Workshop is an amazing group out of New York, supporting Asian American writers. Cave Canem supports hundreds and hundreds of Black poets with workshops and retreats and other types of training. Kundiman also supporting Asian American writers. And these are a few groups that we've supported over time. A couple newer organizations that found us, or we found them. Black Mountain Institute, if you've heard of them. You're in Las Vegas. They're in Las Vegas.
Uh-huh.
They run a City of Asylum program that finds a writer who has been either threatened or run into censorship issues in their home country, or has had to flee their home country, and they set them up with a residency in Las Vegas so that they can write.
Wow.
So we're one of the supporters of that program, which I think is super cool. And then it's fun every year to sort of come across an organization that we hadn't heard of, a little bit under the radar, doing really exceptional work. And there's one, you might have seen the blog posts announcing this year's grants. And if I can find it, this one up in Burlington, Vermont, the Young Writers Project. They host poetry slams. They run a program called Muslim Girls Making Change. They provide mentorship to hidden teen voices that they feel need to be heard. Up there in the northeast corner of the country, small group doing really great work to uplift underrepresented voices. I think it's great.
And what do they mean by young? Are they teenagers or younger even than 13-year-olds? Or
I think teen-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like, teen and up. And then there's another group, like sometimes we've heard of organizations for years, but we just weren't able to fit them in. This year we brought in a couple of new organizations, Transit Books in Oakland, California, publishes award-winning books by little-known writers around the world. And then the Hurston Wright Foundation in D.C., doing workshops for mid-career African-American writers and poets. There's so many good organizations out there, and there's just not enough to go around to support them.
Now, you said you're sort of ending up at 40 to 90 grants a year. Can you give any idea of how many requests for grants that you get in a year that show the winnowing or the choices that you have to make?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't have a specific number, but it's in the hundreds. And we get those requests formally through our application process. We have an online application, and many others informally, just folks who find us, email us, ask for some help, and so it's in the hundreds now.
Where would, if someone heard this and had an idea for a grant, is there a web page that they could go to get the information on how to apply? Yeah. The webpage is sort of in transition now. They can go to AmazonLiteraryPartnership.com, but I think right now that's directing to the list of this year's grantees. At some point, as we get closer to October, which is when we start to accept applications, there'll be an update there and a link to the application. Okay. Yeah, maybe you can maybe just send me an email and I'd sort of update it when we get toward October. So
definitely, yeah.
Well, now you've got a couple of major initiatives this year. The Poetry Fund, I think that's with the Poetry Foundation in Chicago, right?
That one's with the Academy of American Poets in New York.
Okay, right. And well, let's start with that one. What's the design for that partnership with them?
Yeah, well, we've supported them before, just provided a direct grant to the Academy of American Poets, but it just felt like there was so much going on with poetry lately. They're sort of having a moment. I saw in your questions that you were asking about this increase in poetry that's been written about, which is kind of amazing, right? Like, you just don't think of poetry being a hot topic right now, but it really is. There was a survey last year that found that the number of adults reading poetry had doubled in the past 15 years, and so for us, it just felt like a lot of great organizations supporting poetry. Let's partner with one of the better known organizations and try and do something a little bit unique this year, where together we put together a panel that reviewed all the requests for poetry grants. I'm not a poet, I'm not an expert, so it was nice to have this collaboration with the Academy of American Poets to identify organizations that we thought were best suited to support sort of this up-and-coming generation of poets.
So they're helping you to find organizations, or does some of the support go to individual poets?
Not to individual poets.
Oh.
So everything that we've done over the years has been to support the organizations themselves.
I see. When I was at Bennington studying poetry, there was a woman named Tree Swenson. Is she the one that's heading the Academy of American Poets?
She's not now, but I know Tree very well. She's the executive director of Hugo House writing program here in Seattle.
Yeah. Fabulous woman. Well, I mean, that astounds me. I actually got an MFA in poetry at Bennington 11 years ago, and I was submitting poems to little magazines and, had some published. And I basically just got frustrated because it seemed like nobody was reading poetry. The only people that read these little magazines were the poets who were submitting to them. And you're telling me that in the last 15 years, the number of adults reading poetry has doubled? And this isn't like slams, and this is like W.S. Merwin and poets that sort of have been overlooked for decades. For
a long time, yeah. No, I think it's really cool. I think it's having a moment. The study that found that increase in poetry was put together by the National Endowment for the Arts, the NEA. So it was a legit source.
It was rigorous, huh?
Yeah, pretty rigorous. And I think, I don't know the world that well. I read some poetry, but I'm not deep in it. But I do think that part of what's happening is that readers like to process what's happening in the world around them through what they read, right? For some people, that's fiction. For some people, it's reading, about the founding fathers and understanding, the roots of our country. Others are processing what's happening in the world through poetry. And I think that's in large part because of what poets give readers these days. And I think there are some amazing up-and-coming poets whose voices just resonate right now. Writers like Kevin Young or Morgan Parker, Jericho Brown, Danez Smith. And I've seen some of these poets become kind of celebrities in their orbit. They're phenomenal performers of their own work and others. They've got a huge social media presence and huge following, and I think they've really tapped into something. And in some cases, it's these are poets who speak to a specific audience, a queer audience or African American audience, whatever that might be. They speak to that specific group of readers in a way that maybe those readers don't get that kind of sense of the world otherwise.
Do you think it's translating into more sales for poetry books in that period?
Afraid I can't speak to that. I don't know. I hope so.
I mean, if they're reading it, I suppose you could be reading it online, and then you could tell the NEA, I read and I didn't. But
there's one other thing, that brings up a good point. I mean, I do hope there are more books being sold for the sake of the poets, but there are other outlets. I mentioned the Academy of American Poets that we partnered with on this. They have a cool program that we funded the past 2 years called Poem a Day, where you subscribe to get a poem every day. And it comes to you by email. We worked with them earlier this year to put that program on Alexa, so you can. I think you have to initiate the skill first, and then once it's initiated, you can say, Alexa, read me Poem a Day.
Oh, that's cool. And you think that's the name of the skill, Poem a Day? Yeah. What's the organization you're doing the Literary Magazine Fund with?
It's called the Community of Literary Magazines and Presses.
Right, CLMP.
CLMP, yeah. And it's a group, again, we've funded them a number of times over the years. We just like what they do. They fill sort of this niche, I think. There are a lot of literary magazines out there, print and online only, and some of them do great work. Some of them are struggling to make ends meet. Some of them are just hobbies. So CLMP provides sort of advocacy work and some workshops and training, helps some of these small literary magazines do what they do better.
And now, is it $120,000 to each of those that we've been talking about?
That's right. Yeah.
And for the CLMP, is that going to specific magazines with their help, or how does that money get spent?
We worked with them in pretty much the same way we worked with the Academy of American Poets, where we told them we were interested in creating a special fund to support literary magazines because we just felt they were important and underfunded, and then together we decided on a small panel that would review the applications from literary magazines, and then together sort of winnowed down the list and selected these. I forget how many there are. We have the list on the website, but 13 to 15 of the literary magazines that this year will get support.
Huh, that's cool. I years ago, I think I was on an NEA panel that was helping the literature director at the NEA give grants to some of these same kinds of organizations. And do you have any sense of things that you can do as Amazon Literary Partnership in reviewing grants and doing this kind of work versus what the NEA does as kind of an arm of the government, or is there any kind of coordination, or are you kind of aware of what they're doing in the same space?
Totally aware of what they're doing. Amy Stoles is the literature director, and she's just amazing. And we meet or talk by phone a few times a year just to sort of stay in touch. And I'd say there's a lot of overlap. Their list, they do 2 announcements per year. I don't know if they're both out now, but one of the 2, if not the second of the 2, just came out a week or 2 ago. And it's fun for me to go down the list and realize, we supported them too. We supported them, and we supported them. It makes me feel like we're on the right track, and it's just nice to see the NEA supporting these organizations too, and knowing that they're getting even more funding for what they do. Yeah,
that's a pretty important source of help for people.
It's important, and there's just, I've said it a couple times probably, but there's just not enough out there. In recent years, some other funders have pulled back or moved on to other focus areas. I think politics these days has had something to do with that. Grant giving is a little bit more focused on political issues, and it's left a lot of smaller literary organizations struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah. Do you have any idea, in working with CLMP, is the number of literary magazines in the U.S. About what it was 10 years ago, or fewer or more?
It's up, yeah. I asked them about this because I wasn't sure of the numbers, but it sounds like 10, 11 years ago, there were fewer than 500 literary magazines. And I think partly that was because most of those at that time were in print. Now there's the online option. So it's more than double today.
Wow.
Than it was 10 or 11 years ago. I think they're up over 1,100, at least, that they're aware of, print and online literary magazines.
Huh. Well, why are literary magazines important to the publishing industry?
I think they are a kind of a vital proving ground for writers. It's a place where writers can test their voice, get exposed to an audience, learn what works. And I think for the publishing community, the publishers that are looking for up-and-coming voices, it's a way for them to find up-and-coming talent. It really provides this sort of important pipeline from, I have a short story I'm testing out. Where do I go with it? Like you mentioned, submitting your poetry to outlets. I think it's amazing that there's a place then that someone can test out their story, find an audience, and if they're working towards something broader like a book, find a publisher that way, or at least start to develop a portfolio of stories that are out in the world that show who they are and what their voice is. And then the beauty of online now is that becomes part of your resume. Here are links to all of my stories in all these literary magazines. It provides an important platform too.
Yeah, and it's kind of a winnowing. I for a while was close to Agni magazine, which is out of BU, a real good literary magazine, and the volume of submissions that would come in just over the transom. And those guys, Sven Berkertz and Bill Pierce, they'd really read everything, at least read it enough to know whether it was going to be considered. And when you think of all the literary magazines serving that same function of this tsunami of hopeful writers coming in and then actually doing the work of finding the ones that they kind of curate into a high-quality publication, that's and they're not getting paid by the publishing companies for doing that work, and it's all sort of labor of love. But boy, I think that really helps the ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely, yeah, and it is a labor of love, and there's an art to it too. I think you're right. It's how do you sift through so many stories coming across your desk and find something that says something new or different or just has an amazing voice. I think there's a real art to that curation process.
Yeah, for sure. Well, now, before you were doing the literary partnership, you were on that team of book editors at Amazon. I think some people always consider that to be the dream job in America, to just be sitting around Seattle reading all these great books and talking about them. Now there's a podcast. And what do you see any advantages of having spent some time doing that at Amazon and then shifting into the partnership? What did you learn there that's of use to what you're doing now?
Yeah, no, I think they actually dovetailed nicely. Like one led to the other quite well. You're right. It was a dream gig. It was phenomenal. I was the manager of the program called Best Books of the Month for about 3 years. So I worked with the team of editors. Unfortunately, we didn't get to kick up our feet and read at our desks. So the reading was all done on our home time. But still, not bad to get paid to read for a living. And spent a lot of time arguing about books, arguing what books to feature and share with Amazon customers, and other lists like Best Books of the Year. We developed and kind of evolved the book's blog called the Amazon Book Review, stories about books, author interviews, book reviews, that kind of thing. So it was a fantastic experience, and at the same time a little bit daunting, because even though I come from a writing background and have written my own books, it was fascinating to see from the inside just how many books come out in a year. It's something we all in the publishing and literary world have a sense of, but to really see it come across my desk every single day and to feel for every one of those books and those authors and really want to do what's right by them, but knowing that there are limits. We couldn't feature every single book on Amazon.com. I mean, we sell them all, but we couldn't just like we were talking about the curation of stories, we were the curators of the books coming out every month. And I felt a real sense of responsibility there to find the right books that said the right things to the right audience, finding new writers, up-and-coming writers. And so I think that experience gave me a sense of what it's like to be a writer who's just trying to get their work out in the world. And now I'm in a place where I can work a few steps back in the process, where maybe a lot of these writers don't have a book out yet, but that's their goal, that's their dream. For a lot of writers, it is, and to be able to then find the right ways to support the organizations that are doing the right work to help those promising writers get their work into literary magazines or poetry journals, so that at some point they can become the authors who are maybe someday featured on the best books of the month list. It's all part of sort of this, this spectrum from aspiring writer, which is what I was. I would go to writing workshops. I would go to these, conferences and ask the questions that I get asked now. How do you find an agent? How do you find the time to write? How do you find your voice? How do you tell us, like, all these important things that I love discussing, and now I get to help the organizations that are doing exactly that kind of important work.
That's interesting. It's like a pipeline, and you're now back in sort of the early gathering pipelines that feed into the big pipeline that go to the publishers and then finally get to the best books of the month. In some ways, I could imagine that when you see how many books would come across your desk in the Amazon Books group, why would you think there's any need to help more people come into the beginning of that pipeline when it's already sort of bursting with more books than you knew what to do with?
I mean, it's a good question, but it's actually I feel strongly that everyone has a story, and everyone deserves to have the opportunity to tell their story. The rest of us don't have an obligation to buy that story, but at least if it's out in the world and there's a way for people to find it, that's doing good work. Yeah,
and I think too that if you're doing outreach into these various communities, particularly sort of the underserved communities, you're perhaps helping some real literary genius get into this system where without that sort of a helping hand, they might have thought, well, this is just too daunting. And one writer like that can change the world. And
absolutely, no, I think that's a great point, and you're right. And that's what we're looking for, is to find those writers who wouldn't otherwise get the support that they deserve, and they might be the one, and in many cases the organizations that we support, they help writers who have gone on to win National Book Award, National Book Critics Circle Award, Pulitzer Prize, MacArthur Genius Grants, you name it. And again, that's not us taking credit for that. That's the good hard work of these organizations working day in and day out with these writers. But the result of that is that some of these writers are going to become the writers we read about for years to come, or see on the bestseller list, or in some cases their stories can have a just hugely positive impact on the world.
Well, now, I remember when John Fine was basically doing what you were doing, and in those early days, I knew the people that were doing this work at Amazon, and I knew they were genuinely trying to give back to the literary community because of sort of the wars going on in that period with the publishers and the business with Hachette and all that. It seemed quite fashionable at groups like AWP and people who are sort of from the literary community to say, "Oh, Amazon, the bad," the New Yorker article that got written about is Amazon good for books. And my sense is that the environment among folks like that has softened, has mellowed, that's kind of the wars of the old days, and that your work is perhaps not quite such a lightning rod as it might have been among people or groups like that. Is that your sense of it? And if so, what do you think is accounting for a kind of an evolution in how Amazon is perceived among the people that you work with pretty regularly?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, but I'd say I really don't pay attention to it that much. Not that I don't care about people's perceptions necessarily, but mainly I'm just focused on doing what we try and do, providing the best help to organizations that are helping writers, hoping that has a long-term impact on the literary community and on writers' lives. There's so much else that's just out of my control.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I can't really control people's opinions of Amazon, and I'm not trying to change them with this program either. What the beauty of this program is that we've been allowed to genuinely give money away to organizations that are helping writers.
Yeah.
And I've seen the impact of it. We've heard from a lot of the leaders of the organizations that we support, or writers who've received support through those organizations. We've heard from them about the impact that it has on their work. And that's what's satisfying, is to hear directly from them and know that the support we provide them is really meaningful and helps them do more of what they do, because it's just not out there.
Well, and your consistency of being focused on that work and not being distracted by whether people are criticizing you or praising you, I think that's to your credit, and it shows that the genesis of, I mean, if Amazon had only started this 10 years ago to try to buy some friends in the literary community, once that tougher period faded away, Amazon might have said, we're not going to spend $1 million a year doing this because we don't have a problem to solve. And the truth is that there was a genuine interest in doing this because it mattered. And that goes all the way down from Jeff Bezos. I mean, when he talks about, missionaries working on the Kindle and having more people read books is just good. It doesn't, they're missionaries, not mercenaries. There's that through line of the partnership that I think shows that this was not just sort of a tactic to handle a difficult period.
Yeah, no, and I think another thing that speaks to that is that we were very quiet about it for so many years. When I took over, excuse me, starting in 2015, we didn't have a name for the program. We didn't have a public application process. But we learned in meeting, as I do regularly with the organizations that we support, we learned that it was beneficial for them to have more public recognition around this program, because it validates their efforts. It allows them to say Amazon gave us a grant, and then that allows them in turn to go raise other funds from other organizations because of that validation from having an Amazon Literary Partnership grant. So we realized that we were being maybe too quiet about it, and that it was better for the organizations to just talk more. Yeah,
that makes sense. Well, let's talk about some of your writing. You've published 4 books, and you're working on one now. What kind of books do you write, and how do you have time doing your own writing when you have to spend so much time helping other people do their writing?
I don't. That's the problem, Len. I've actually published 5 so far, and they've been 4 of them were nonfiction. I come from a journalism background. I was a newspaper reporter for a bunch of years, and freelance magazine writer, and I've taught creative nonfiction. So my books have primarily been narrative nonfiction, research-based, a couple of biographies, kind of around this theme of a little bit of Americana, a little bit of focus on people trying to make it in America, people trying to live big lives that matter. Biography of Robert Ripley, the Ripley's Believe It or Not guy, is an example. A biography of the astronaut Alan Shephard. And then more recently, I wrote a memoir called Kickflip Boys, a completely different kind of story about raising 2 boys who were skateboarders and defiers of authority and seekers of fun and freedom and independence, and what it was like to try and be a father who was also like that as a kid, and now raising 2 boys at the time, middle school and high school, who are often driving me crazy the way I drove. That's crazy. But trying to give them the freedom that they crave, and not be a helicopter parent, and let them figure some of life out on their own.
When was that one published?
That was published May of 2018, and just came out in paperback May of 2019.
And then can you say what you're working on now? What's your next book going to be about?
I've got a couple projects. One is sort of leading the race at the moment. I met Eric Larson years ago, and he gave me valuable advice. He said, "Don't talk about it until you know what it is."
All right, I believe that too. I won't even ask any more questions about it.
Too half-baked to make any sense.
Yeah, there's some jinxing that can happen. I'm writing a book about this. Whoa, what happened to it?
Exactly.
So, and it said when you were at the Baltimore Sun, you were writing about soldiers and spies. Is that still an interest of yours?
Not particularly. It was a blast at the time. I spent 5 years at the Baltimore Sun. I covered the NSA for a little bit. I covered military, the Naval Academy, and got really interested in that world. Failed at writing a novel about spies back at that time, and ended up. My first book was the Alan Shephard astronaut book. Mm-hmm. I just got fascinated by that world. He came from the military background. He was a test pilot.
Yeah. So
I spent a little time, delving into the soldiers and spies storyline, and then got distracted after that by Moonshiners and NASCAR. That was my next book. I'm all over the map.
And what's a good book that you've read lately that you could talk about and recommend?
Oh, wow. Too many. Let's see. Where do I start? I always have 2 or 3 at least going at one time. This weekend I've finished 2 within a day of each other. Robert Caro's Working, if you've seen that.
That's more about his autobiography as opposed to the LBJ stuff?
It's more about his writing process.
I see.
And it's focused on doing the research, interviewing, and sort of organizing his work, which sounds kind of dull, but for a writer, it was fantastic. It was super insightful. He's such a diligent guy, and it was fascinating to hear him experience some of the same things I have over the years, where you think a book's going to take a year, and it takes multiple years.
Yeah.
And what do you do for income during that period of time? And you want to be true to the story, but you want to eat. Really, really great insider look at his. He's just masterful, I think. Susan Orlean's The Library book was a good one. Mm-hmm. Really fascinating story that's sort of a part investigation into the arson of the L.A. Central Library, but also kind of an ode to libraries themselves and a little bit of history of libraries, fascinating characters over the years. She's just such a wonderful writer.
Yeah.
2 others, Colson Whitehead's Nickel Boys. I read in Galley. I don't know if it's out just yet. And then a memoir called Heavy by Kiese Lehman was brilliant. Just fantastic.
Now, when you're reading books like that, or just generally, are you sometimes on the Kindle, sometimes paper? What's your technology for reading these days? Yeah,
both. I probably lean toward paper when I can, but definitely have an overstuffed Kindle, or probably more like 5 Kindles. Between tablets and e-readers, and I'm trying to read more on Audible. I have been a sporadic Audible book listener over the years, but I'm trying to get back to that now. So whatever it takes, just I'm a voracious reader, so I'll take it any way I can get it.
Anything else?
No, this is fantastic. I appreciate your interest in this. It's something I really care a lot about. So anyone who wants to talk with me about it, I'm grateful.
Well, it shows. I have been talking with Neal Thompson, manager of Amazon Literary Partnership. Thanks very much, Neal.
Thanks a lot. Good to talk to you, Len.
That's it for this week. My guest next week will be a co-founder of an innovative newsletter distribution tool named N2 Kindle. That's the letter N, the number 2, and then Kindle. And it enables you to read newsletters on your dedicated Kindle e-reader device. They're based at the University of Munich, so I'll be talking to the co-founder, Noah, next week, and interested in how this project got going. And I've been using it. It's an interesting way to have newsletters that I subscribe to via N2 Kindle. There's no charge. Come across onto a Kindle in a way that's, again, a little bit less distracted reading than on a tablet and other devices. This week, I finally uploaded a video review of the 3 Kindles that took into account the new basic Kindle, which was introduced a couple of months ago. And I attempted just to compare them, the Kindle, the Oasis, and the Paperwhite, to see what the different features are. And I was hopeful that it might offer some ways to decide which of these three Kindles might be suitable for different kinds of readers. I also had some help from my grandsons, Ryan and Jake, 5 and 3, who had some entertaining comments of their own on the three Kindles in the outro and the intro to the video. I think the video is about 22 minutes long. I'll have a link to it in the show notes, and you can find it at youtube.com/Len Edgerly. That's my channel, and it's the most recent video that I've put up there. It's been nice talking to you by the fire. It's settled down enough. I think I'll be able to go up to bed safely without worrying it's going to crawl out and do any damage into this old fire trap of a cottage. But it's always a nice presence to be here on a chilly night with the fire. And it's been nice to be with you listening to the show, and thanks, and hope you've enjoyed it. This is Len Edgerly in Ocean Park, Maine for the Kindle Chronicles.